Today we're going to talk about the end of World War II, and we'll be on page 9 of your interactive notebook. So if we back up just a little bit, and just as a recap or a reminder of VE Day, in August of 1944, Paris is liberated. Thanks to the help from the invasion on Normandy on D-Day, the Allied troops were able to push through France and start to push Germany back to where it came from. So we're going to liberate all of these countries that had fallen to Germany in the early stages of the war. The Battle of the Bulge, again, remember, is Germany's final chance to try to kind of be a contender in the war and to push the Allies back. But they are not able to do that. And the German leadership does realize that, they see the writing on the wall. The war is at an end and they are not going to be victorious. So that leads Hitler to commit suicide on April 30th, 1945. He left behind, a fractured government and a fractured military without his leadership. So actually a civilian representative for the government who officially surrenders on May 8th, 1945. And that becomes known as VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day. So this is the end of the war in the European theater. But again, as we talked about when we looked at the Pacific theater, the war is still raging on in the South Pacific, trying to push Japan back to Japan. So a lot of the troops, in early May thought, oh, the war is over, we get to go home. Unfortunately for them, some of them got redirected down to the South Pacific to aid in that conquest. So how do we bring the war to an end down in the South Pacific, or against the Japanese, who, we've seen are, a ruthless foe, and, just did not give up, would not surrender. If we back up even further, as far back as August of 1939, a plan had been in play, or a weapon had been in development as early as August of 1939. Albert Einstein, who's pictured here, if you don't know what he looks like, he's the guy with the crazy hair. Albert Einstein was a German immigrant to the United States, and he had information that he passed along to FDR, informing him that the Germans were developing some type of a weapon, some type of a bomb that would be very, very powerful, and, in the wrong hands would probably cause mass destruction. So it was one of these, here's a note, just let you know. Albert Einstein wanted nothing to do with the project, so he just passes the information along and then says, see you later. So FDR takes that information and organizes a top secret project, because known as the Manhattan Project, very highly classified, and it was basically the project to create the atomic bomb, and it was a race to do it before the Germans. J. Robert Oppenheimer, who is also pictured here, becomes the father of the atomic bomb, or he's the guy in charge of the project. They are successful in creating the bomb, and they test it for the first time on July 16, 1945, on American soil in the desert of New Mexico. From that test, observers from a distance saw the typical, if you've looked at the atomic bomb, you've seen pictures or videos of it, they saw a blinding flash of light, a huge explosion, and that explosion was so big that it left a massive crater in the desert of New Mexico. They also reported that as far as 125 miles away, that the windows in buildings had been shattered. So to put into perspective just how far away 125 miles is, if we were to use Hudson as ground zero, like we dropped a bomb on Hudson, 125-mile radius is outlined in this red circle. So it would blast as far as, it wouldn't blast, I'm sorry, but, shattering windows 125 miles away. That would include New York City. It would include Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, obviously, all of Delaware. Parts of Pennsylvania would be impacted. So that's just how big that radius was from that bomb being dropped in New Mexico. So Truman comes into play in April of 1945 when, remembered, FDR passes away. This project was so highly classified that even Truman did not know about it. He's the vice president of the United States, and he was not privileged to the information about the Manhattan Project. So it's like literally FDR passes away, and then they're like, hey, guess what? We've been working on this weapon for the past couple of years. We don't know. You might want to use it. So those who, Oppenheimer included, those who created this bomb, they pleaded with the American government not to use it because they really did feel that it was so devastating and so destructive that, it just should not be used. Truman, it was really a tough decision, and he decides to use it for two reasons ultimately. One would be that he says we're going to test it on a hostile population, and a lot of Americans did not agree with that, because how once they see what it does, how devastating it is, they don't agree with it. But his counter argument to that was, remember Pearl Harbor. He says it is what it is. It's a time of war. And then the other reason is that it's going to save lives, both American and Japanese lives. They estimated that, in 1945, the summer of 1945, even after all of the island hopping campaigns and all the success they had in the South Pacific, if the Allies were to invade mainland Japan at that time, they estimated over 1 million Allied deaths. And then countless Japanese deaths as well. So he really wanted to avoid that if he could. Yes, obviously the impact of the bomb would kill people that way, but it was going to be less than an invasion. So we do drop the bomb. The first one was dropped on August 6th, 1945, on the city of Hiroshima. The code name or the nickname for the bomb was Little Boy. And observers, the crew of the Enola Gay that's pictured here, the flight crew that dropped the bomb, they reported that they had seen, the typical mushroom cloud, the large, the blast, an intense amount of heat. It takes out the city center and, civilians in an instant. They estimated between 70 and 80,000 killed instantly. Another 70,000 were injured. That's all due to the blast. And then they also say that, they have figures that I don't have here, but after many people died later in life, it could have been weeks, months, years, decades, but due to radiation exposure and radiation poisoning. It has a great impact. Just to put in perspective what this bomb did, here's a picture of Hiroshima prior to the atomic bomb. And obviously, 1945 picture is very grainy, but you can see here clearly defined some sort of a river. You can see roads. You can see some sort of imperial building or a temple or something up in the top right-hand corner. But after the atomic bomb is dropped, you can see it almost looks like someone just kind of started erasing things. It's very grayed out. It's not as clearly defined. Obviously, the waterways are still there because they're natural boundaries, but those roads are kind of blurred. And so, you can tell that just everything basically got leveled from that bomb. We did drop leaflets and things from planes, warning saying, please surrender, please surrender. We did it prior to the first bomb as well. But unfortunately, the Japanese would not surrender due to their honor code. So 3 days later, on August 9th, 1945, we dropped a second atomic bomb on the city of Nagasaki. That bomb was known as Fat Man. And we, again, had another 40 to 75,000 estimated deaths due to the initial impact. The United States, again, dropped more leaflets, said, please surrender, please surrender. But the Japanese still were kind of holding out. So here's a pre-picture of Nagasaki. Same idea. You can see clearly defined roads, waterways, housing, buildings, and then here I think this one is even more blurred out than our Hiroshima. So there's your post picture. The Americans did threaten to say we had another bomb. We said, please surrender. We're going to drop another one. We were 100% bluffing. We had not developed another one. Fortunately, the Japanese finally did announce their surrender. It's something that was very, very hard for their culture to do. But on August 14th, 1945, they do announce their surrender. So about 5 days after the second bomb had been dropped. So a few weeks later, they do sign the formal surrender, which you can see pictured here with General MacArthur in the foreground off to the left. They sign it aboard the USS Missouri, and that brings about VJ Day, or Victory over Japan Day, and that is the end of World War II. So lots of excitement, lots of celebration at the end of the war. This is where the famous Times Square sailor kissing the nurse comes from. But people were just very excited that this very devastating, gruesome, long war was finally over, and now we have to kind of pick up the pieces. And it causes some problems that will lead us into our next unit, because now the Americans have a very devastating weapon that they did not share with their friends. Primarily, the Russians are very upset. And then we also have to pick up the pieces with Germany and Japan and kind of start to rebuild the world again, because we have to put these economies back together. We have to put these nations back together and learn how to prevent something like this happening again in the future. So again, we've been talking about the end of World War II. Make sure you enter this into your interactive notebook and use it for any of the materials and assignments that go along with this unit. Thanks for watching.